Gallifrey's Most Wanted. I'm Ross Aiken. I'm Old Who.
And I'm Jason Miller. I'm Bookworm.
Bookworm with a Y?
Yes, with a Y.
So, folks, we're gonna. Since I started this podcast in 2017, we said when we got to the end of Sylvester's TV shows, we would do the new adventure novels because I've never read them, and as of today, I have read one, and it is this one that Timewyrm Genesys, the first new adventure novel, and it took me 91, so 33 years.
Yeah, this book came out in June of 91, and we're sitting here in February of 24, so we're more than 33 and a half years. Well,
yeah,
almost 32 and a half, I'll say.
And I didn't know, because I wasn't getting my Doctor, at times I wasn't getting comics and stuff, and I would have to play catch up, especially on Doctor Who news, because there was no internet yet, or not much. And there just happened to be a little bookstore in the neighborhood I lived in, the fan section of Richmond, which is like, nice townhomes and stuff like that. And I went in there, just go, look, a bookstore opened. And I just moved in the neighborhood, and there were the first 4 of these were on the shelves. So I picked them up, and I said I'd read them, and I would find them whenever I went to a Walden's or a Dalton's back in those days. And I had most of them, but I never read them. And I started to read this one, and I struggled. And people who listen to this podcast have heard me say that. I mean, I've been reading it for 30 years. And I finally finished it about a year and a half ago. Really, it's been that long. And Time War Genesis, Virgin New Adventure, #1. Writer, John Peel. Cover art, Andrew Skilter. Release date, June 20th, 1991. The following synopsis is from I Who, The Unauthorized Guide to Doctor Who Novels by Lars Pearson, published by Mad Norwegian, copyright October 1999. Fresh from the recent adventures, the Doctor finds a message from himself lodged in the TARDIS telepathic circuits. It warns against an apocalyptic creature called the Timewrym, and based on the coordinates included in the warning, the Doctor and Asa depart for ancient Mesopotamia. There, they meet the historical leader named Gilgamesh and save him from an attack by a rival Kishit warriors with some well-thrown Nitro-9. The grateful Gilgamesh believes them to be gods. In the city of Kish, the Doctor finds a stranded cybernetic space traveler has assumed the role of Ishtar, goddess of sex. Some of Kish's people, enthralled by Ishtar's cybernetic implants, are building a giant city-sized copper transmitter. When complete, the transmitter will let Ishtar broadcast her hypnotic signals and mesmerize the entire planet. The Doctor gains allies, especially the mythological Utnapishtim, pronouncing that incredibly wrong, a rebel leader from pretend Ishtar's home planet. Together, they storm Ishtar's temple, but Ishtar, with a small insurance policy as a thermonuclear device that will detonate if she dies. For this reason, the Doctor is horrified to see Utnapishtim, God, I'm butchering it, unleashes a computer virus into Ishtar's internal system that threatens her life. The Doctor convinces the bomb's programming that Ishtar is still alive using the TARDIS's telepathic circuit. But this creature is a two-way link that allows Ishtar's consciousness to invade the TARDIS system via the bomb. In a last-ditch effort, the Doctor ejects the TARDIS system infected by Ishtar's mind into the time vortex, hoping the forces there will destroy her. Instead, Ishtar's consciousness merges with the virus and the dumped TARDIS systems, creating a new entity with power over time and space, the Timewrym. Having just created the creature they are supposed to be guarding against, the Doctor and Ace track the Timewrym to her next destination. Again, a great synopsis from Lars Pearson in I Who, The Unauthorized Guide to Doctor Who Novels. But I'm gonna ask Jason to tell his history with the book and what he thought about it, and then I'm gonna chime in because he's more knowledgeable than I am.
Well, my history with the books could not be any more different to yours, and this comes from our being of different generations. Yeah. So you would have been in your late 20s when these came out, and you would have been in a very different sector of fandom and your professional life. For me, these came out my freshman year of college. Now, you have to understand that I became a huge Doctor Who fan at age 11, and over the next several years I started drifting away from the show, which is what happens. Most childhood obsessions don't last much past your teenage years when they are replaced, in my case, by girls, baseball, and Star Trek, roughly in that order. I was painfully aware that Doctor Who fandom was a niche thing from the mid-'80s, and by 1990, absolutely nobody in my orbit of acquaintance cared about Doctor Who a bit. They are down to 4 new serials a year, which are coming to PBS, but they're not aired predictably, so I did not see Battlefield or Ghostlight for years, because I missed their airings. And I know that in the UK, the McCoy years are considered the last golden age of the show and a complete creative revival, and I just did not see that. I watched those episodes. They went in one eye and out the other. Didn't like most of them. When I got to college in August of 1991 in Maryland, I said, you know what, I'm just not going to identify as a Doctor Who fan because it's not cool. This is not the way to make friends and influence people. I have to have, interests that I can have conversations with, not just me talking about this show that I love that nobody else has ever heard of. What changed is there was a campus poster sale. I don't even know if colleges need to do this anymore, but you would go to the main...
We have a Goya... In my house, my wife has her framed Goya poster, and you know exactly which poster I'm talking about, and it hangs in our fucking kitchen.
But at this poster sale, they had a whole bunch of glossy photographs taken from different shows, pop culture movies, and I found... It was the only Doctor Who photograph in the collection. It was a still photo from Part 2 of Death to the Daleks. So with all the other posters, I had this little tiny 8x10 glossy photo of John Pertwee, John Abernethy, and half of a Dalek prop, which painfully obvious is plywood spray painted silver. And I had this one little tiny photo on my room in between everything else that a 17, 18-year-old college boy is going to have on his dorm room wall. There was one other kid in my dorm, a guy named Rich from North Attleboro, Massachusetts, and he recognized it, and it turns out he was a major PBS Doctor Who fan like I was. He is the one who told me in October that he went to independent bookstore off campus and he found the first 2 New Adventures, and he showed me his copies, and I'm like, wow, those look gorgeous. Then he was telling me, not the spoilers, but he was telling me basically what the broad outlines of each book were about. When I went home for my first Thanksgiving break, this is November of 91, I spent one day at the old shopping mall where I bought my first novelizations in 1985. That story I've told several times on Doctor Who literature. But squaring the circle, I saw the first 2 NAs for sale over Thanksgiving, so I got Genesys and Exodus on the same day, started to read them in order. The train ride back to college on the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and then sitting in my dorm room, I finished both books in less than a week. Went back home over Xmas break, and that's where I bought Apocalypse. And then after that, the books were harder to come by, and I spent most of the next year not finding any. Didn't really get steady bookstore distribution until late 92, early 93. But in the interim, my interest in the show is reignited. I go on Records Doctor Who, which had become basically a books message board for most of the early 90s, and the authors started to show up. The New Adventures were the actual core focus of fandom for a good 5 years in the early 90s, is because this is before Paul McGann, this is before Big Finish, this is before Virgin Publishing lost the license. So the New DWM even became, a books-focused magazine for a few years there. So the books are where they were at, and I just started buying them. They turned monthly in early '93, and I bought them every month. And the distribution deal became harder to come by at the end, and I had to have friends in Canada and the UK mail me copies.
Yeah, it took me decades to find the last couple. It took me 20 years, really.
I got them as they came out, and I had a complete collection of all 61 in pretty pristine condition. And then my mother-in-law last year did an overly zealous spring cleaning of her garage where I had several boxes stored. And of my 11 boxes in her garage, 7 of them were given to Got Junk. And, of course, all the boxes that had stuff that I cared about were lost, and the only boxes left I couldn't have cared less about. So all my NAs, all my MAs, almost all of my PDAs and EDAs were gone, except for a few stray EDAs that had been in a different box. Those I sold on eBay for $20 a head. But I've been rebuilding, having lost all 61 of my new adventures, including the ones that are worth, between $100 and $500 a piece on eBay. Every single one is gone. Luckily, thanks to the generosity of friends, including you, who mailed me a bunch of yours, and
yeah, because I had sold mine. I had those. I had the ones that no one wanted to buy. It seemed like, and they were like the last 4 or 5.
So I have now rebuilt. I've got, I think, as of this morning, my wife got me 2 mint copies of Cat's Cradle Times Crucible and Lucifer Rising that she was able to find in the darkest corners of eBay. Those literally arrived today. I've got 7 or 8 left, including the really expensive ones. And when I'm at Galley next weekend, maybe I will be able to find some of those at a price that I'm willing to pay. I do plan to rebuild the entire collection. Day?
What is that? Dying Days, and what are the tough ones still?
So Vile a Sin, Dying Days, Lung Barrow, and then A Room with No Doors and Eternity Weeps are, I think, in the mix.
Okay. I like to know that since I don't have them anymore. I have a scan copy of some of them. So, yeah. But when you got this, what did you think of this book at first? But let's talk about let's talk about the content of the book, and I'll get more history from you. This story for me has a lot of things that I want in a Doctor Who story. I like it when it's set in the past. I don't think they do that enough. Like when you have historical figures who come along on the adventure, but the Doctor, them becoming famous, isn't a side effect of the Doctor adventuring with them. The ones where, like, I gave him I hate that in any time travel story. But I don't know why it never, I thought it would have triggered with me. I thought when I started reading it and I read the back and I got into it a little bit, I thought I'd like it more, but I didn't. I got kind of slogged down in it. It had all these great things in it, but it never clicked. And until I finished, and when I finished it, I think I enjoyed the ending, and it made the overall thing. Because when I would pick it back up, I would go back and read big chunk. I would reread most of it, because I would go, okay, I don't remember where I left off, or I don't remember any of this. But it never nailed it for me. It just felt a little bit like to me, it read like fan fiction. Good fan fiction, but it read more like fan fiction than a good novel. Does that make sense?
It does, but for context, remember, I am in my first semester of college, and I was a history major my first semester and a half. Yeah. I had just read the Epic of Gilgamesh for the first time as part of coursework about a month before I discovered Timewyrm Genesys. So for me, the story was fresh and immediate, and it was a science fiction version of a story that I had just learned and enjoyed. And college was a slog for me. I didn't really figure out what I was doing academically until the very end of my junior year. Then I finished with a degree a million miles away from where I had started in history. Mm-hmm. But reading Epic of Gilgamesh was one of the few higher points of those first horrible years of college, and reading Timewyrm Genesys right after that was the perfect companion piece. I have since become friends with John Peel, and he comes to all the Elihu's, and I've been able to interview him 2 or 3 times for different podcasts. And I interviewed him about this book for a documentary that I did for Trap One on the first year of the New Adventures. This is during the pandemic, so I think 2021 we recorded it. So I was able to hear from him. So the idea is Peter Darvill Evans had been running the show with the late novelizations. As the novelizations are running out, he gets the idea to acquire the license and do original fiction. He gets the license. He is able to get the license pretty broad so that he has access to any monster or creation from Doctor Who, with the exception of the Daleks. The NAs were never quite able to cross that bridge. But this is why you're able to have, the Brigadier is in this book, and you are able to have returning monsters in several of the later New Adventures. So John Peel very big name in UK fandom, had recently moved to New York. He is writing this book from New York and faxing his pages over to the Virgin offices, I think in Ladbroke Grove. But the idea is for the very first new adventure, they're going to do the very first novel, The Epic of Gilgamesh. And they got Sophie Aldred to do the introduction, talking about how this book makes Gilgamesh come to life a lot more than reading about it in school ever had. And no other book later in the line is like this one. So that's the great thing about the NAs. They really did tell stories too broad and deep for the small screen. They could literally go anywhere. No one book is like another. So this is atypical of the way the line would go, especially with regard to feminism and gender identity in politics and the sexual content. This book does not look like the later books. This is not at all representative of what the NAs will become. But at this point, comes out June 91, the NAs don't know what they are yet. So this is a good starting off point for a line that's trying to figure out what it wants to be.
And when does it find its foot? After Cat's Cradle, when they stop doing the arcs, or does it get it sooner than that?
It figures it out in October 1992 when Love and War comes out by one Paul Cornell. And then 2 months later, December 1992, Ben Aronovich's Transit, which is a full-on, disconcerting, anime-infused cyberpunk novel, which takes place in the 21st or 22nd century, half on Earth, half on Mars. And those two books could not be more different from one another. But this tells you that the NAs are now arrived. We have this new generation of authors, one of whom was coming up through fanzines, the other one of whom had written for the show and would later go on to be the major novelist with the Rivers of London series. And then after that, the books just got better and better and better.
Yeah, I wish because this was these were coming out, and I would get them when I saw them, and then because I was a fan, and I had all my Doctor Who monthlies, I had all my Targets, I wanted them for my collection, that hoarder thing that fans, but I didn't really get into the novels until the McGann ones, because the McGann the movie and him, not the quality of the movie, but him as the Doctor really resonated with me, and I wanted to see his adventures, and I didn't have a TV for a while, so and they were coming out. I did read read the missing ones from Virgin when they started coming out, because I didn't need to catch up. I could just read them in a bubble, So I never went to read these. What I liked about my pet peeves with this one is there's a bit where the third and fourth Doctor stuff toward the end is just clumsy and a little too much fan reverence for me, but I do like the things that I like is I do like Gilgamesh as a character, even though he's kind of repugnant. You know what I mean? He is a pig, but throughout the book they're going, oh, he's a pig. And Ace comments on it. But I've never read the legend. I know the basic of the Gilgamesh legend, but I never studied it in school. So, and it's not a story that I was familiar enough to get that connection you have. Like if this had been something about, English seafaring stuff, I would have known more about, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't have a context for it. Other than, the only Gilgamesh character I know is the Marvel version of him, and he's a bit like this.
It's the other side of Noah's Ark. It's what happens to people during the flood who are not invited onto Noah's Ark. And the same flood is the exact same flood, but it's also a major part of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Oh, then I wish I'd known that. I mean, I like the adventure part of this. I like. I just think it didn't resonate with me because I like the villain. I liked all the secondary characters. I think he does a good job of creating those characters in this. And I've liked others of his books in there more, and some I've only read. I think I've read 4 of his, and 2 of them are the Dalek ones in the Eighth Doctor.
Those are polarizing books.
Yeah. I didn't mind them when I was a kid. I didn't think they were the greatest, but I was like, I don't have there's some visceral hatred for them. I don't think that, I enjoy. I mean, they were was a Doctor Who book. It had Daleks in it, and Susan was in it, and whatever. I was fine. Yeah.
War of the Daleks retconned the end of Remembrance of the Dalek, which was a sacred cow for online fandom. So Rekart's Doctor Who for a good couple of years was just full of people fighting back and forth as to whether or not it was a good idea to bring Scarrow back. But 30 years on, we can say that John Peel won. Scarrow did come back in the new series, and nobody complained that it had taken away the end of Ben Aronovich's TV story. So that seems like a very silly fight to have. Plus, I read the book a few years back, and War of the Daleks actually reads very well. Very competent technical thriller, lots of planets and lots of ideas going on. So the hatred for the book was completely out of proportion for what's between the front and back cover.
Well, that's just fans. I mean, I'm a comic fan and a Doctor Who fan, and there's this thing about, well, you killed this character, but they brought him back 2 years later. It's like a soap opera. No one stays dead. Nothing stays destroyed. Geez, the Star Wars movies. There's the Death Star every frickin' movie. I liked it when they destroyed Gallifrey the second time in Modern Who. I forget which time it was. And Stephen Cole, I think it was Stephen Cole, posted something destroying Gallifrey since 2001 or whenever the. You know what I mean? Like, we've all destroyed it. Quit complaining about it. We've all, it's like, it's been done tons of times. It'll be done again.
Well, let me defend the appearance of the third and fourth Doctors in this book. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go out on my limb here. The new adventures continue with Sylvester McCoy because he was the current TV Doctor. While McCoy's Doctor was very popular with a certain segment of fandom who happened to love his last 2 years, the Cartmel-Aronovich crowd, fandom as a whole did not care about the Seventh Doctor. He was the lowest rated TV Doctor. He was the Doctor when the plug was pulled. They were not certain if a line of books about this less popular Doctor at the time were going to sell. It makes perfect sense to lean on Doctor Who's 26-year history and find a way to bring other Doctors into the mix. Now, 3 years later, Peter Darvill Evans, once the NAs are solid and assured for the future, he goes and creates The Missing Adventures as a companion piece. So now once a month you get books about other Doctors between 1 and 6. And for Cold Fusion, half of the book is about the Seventh Doctor crossing over from the New Adventures. But early on, the only way to bring in fans who love Doctor Who but not the McCoy era is to feature other Doctors. So that is why the second book in the series, which I hope we get to, Timewyrm Exodus, is a sequel to a couple of different TV stories and written by the great Terrence Dicks. The third book, Apocalypse, features the second Doctor in it in several flashback scenes and also opens with an epigraph from Logopolis and is kind of sort of a conceptual sequel to Logopolis. And the last book in the initial 4-book cycle, the only one written by a new author from fandom, Paul Cornell, Timewyrm Revelation has all of the first 7 Doctors in it working together in a story that takes place inside the Doctor's mind. So having the third Doctor show up, temporarily reasserting control of the Seventh Doctor's body, and having the fourth Doctor show up in a flashback which was videotaped in the middle of the invasion of time, and having the Brigadier show up, that is talking to Doctor Who fans who didn't necessarily love McCoy and say, it's okay for you to read these books. We are going to have something for everybody.
All right. That makes sense, because I loved McCoy's last 2 years, and I liked Cartmel's reign on the show, because Sayward's run was so terrible, on and off. I mean, there's stuff in that era I like, but it's probably in spite of him. So what was your take on this? I come to accept Time's Champion, or whatever they want to call him in this, because I haven't read him, and I went, okay, I can see him being a manipulative little. So, as someone who read it, did that kind of sway any fans more toward liking his Doctor, or is it kind of like this is just his Doctor in the novel form? I mean, you as a reader, because McCoy's not in your. Where does McCoy stand in your era? So
when I want to watch a classic series story for comfort, it is very rarely in McCoy that I get to. Over the years, I have come to appreciate some of the stories more than others. So when I pulled my all-time top 60 list, I did that first for an LI Who panel last summer. I did an episode in November 2023 of Doctor Who literature. Me and Sean Lyon from Gallifrey One doing our respective top 60s. And the weekend after we record this, I will be at Galley moderating the 6460 panel. On my top 60, I have 4 McCoy stories on them. So I have Curse, I have Remembrance, I have Delta and the Bannerman, and I have Paradise Towers. So 4 of his 12 are on my top 60 list of all time. But it took me a while to get there. If I had done my top 60 list in 1991 when the NA started, 0 of his stories would have been on there.
Yeah. He was just a right doctor for me at that time, and I loved those stories. And having met Andrew Cartmel, and me and Vic got to meet him at a panel, and it's the favorite panel I've ever been to, because it was just like 8 people in there, and all but me and Vic were dressed like Ace. And then he said, I don't want to sit behind the table, and we just kind of sat around in a circle, and he just kind of started a conversation about Doctor Who, and it was really nice, and all the people that were there to see him because of Ace and their love of his stuff, it was very nice. He was very incredibly engaging. He got everybody to talk about their love of Doctor Who more than so it was nice. So I've always liked his stuff, and I had some of my favorite weird Doctor Who's. Like, I love Paradise Towers. I love it because I like it when Doctor Who just goes, okay, there's this planet where everybody has to be happy, and it just those are my kind of go-to Doctor Who stories, and I do love Curse of Fenric, and I think it's a nice end, and Remembrance is a lot of fun. I think it's one of the better anniversary shows because it celebrates the show, but it's not about the celebration. So.
On the flip side, I was previously on this show to discuss Survival, so I guess I've done back-to-back McCoy episodes.
Oh, yeah, you have.
Survival is my least favorite classic Doctor Who of all time. It is nasty, it is cynical. Every choice that it makes, the series would later reverse. So I enjoy the NAs a lot more than I enjoy Survival, and this book started it off for me. Yes, it is not the best of the NAs. Yes, the Lion later found its feet, and its feet look nothing like this. But for me, in 1991, this book really, really worked for me, and I read it several times the first few years. And the last couple of times that I read it, I can see the holes in it. Every female character in the first several chapters is stark naked, and that audience is not what became the NA's core audience.
No, because then that's what gets me. It's because there's a lot, I think. My knowledge that there were female Doctor Who fans came from following the novels in like the magazines and on social media and stuff. I went, oh look, Doctor Who has an incredibly heavy female fan base. It's not an all boys club with a lot of fandom. Like, I mean, I started reading comics and watching science fiction in 1972, and it was always kind of really an old boys club. But I found that Doctor Who was the first fandom, and following it in this era was seeing it, that, you had the women writers, were writing it. And a lot of the fans I saw chatting online were women. And that I liked it, that disengaged it. I think that he writes Ace well. I don't know if it's 100% Ace, but Ace is empowered and she's, she drives action. She's not, you know what I mean? She reacts the way Ace should react.
There's a couple of moments. So, for example, she's naked in her first chapter. I'm not sure that's strictly necessary from a storytelling standpoint. The set piece where she sings "The Wild Rover" in Mesopotamia, and it lands for the audience because the lyrics are timeless. That's a great moment. That stay with me. Every time I hear that song now, I think of Sophie Aldred's character performing it in this book. At the same time, when she nitro nines a crowd of Mesopotamians and doesn't stop to see who lived or died, that's not the character of Ace.
Yeah,
that probably should not have gotten past the editor, but it did.
Yeah, I mean, because I think with the reputation of the NAs that they were a little more adult. I mean, and they are, because the audience is aging. People go, why are you doing it? It's because you're not going to get new Who fans really from these books. So you are catering to a fan base that is now, the youngest are like you were 17, 18. So I guess that's why they do it. And I think, I don't think it works in this book. But I have read others in the book. I've read Love and War. And I think it's written above like a little kid's thing, but it's definitely written for like people in their early 20s and stuff like that. Some of the aspects of it, and I read them in my 30s. By the time I read that one, I was 30.
The core audience of NA writers is going to go on to be British men in their early to mid 20s, and they all came out of the same generation of fandom. John Peel is about a decade ahead of them, but if you look at the pop culture references in this book, it's of a line with the pop culture references that will infuse the rest of the NAs. Just about every new adventure has at least one chapter named for whatever record or tape the author was playing as they were writing the book. Gary Russell's 1994 New Adventure Legacy, every single chapter is named for a Gary Newman song, except for Cars, because there were no cars on Peladon. This one has a chapter called Band on the Run. There's references to Stan Lee. There's references to Watership Down. He quotes Hegel. So he's pretty much of a similar mindset to the later NA writers who were all a bit younger, that this is his pop culture making its way into his book.
Yeah. Well, I like that. I always like when someone puts let's know where you're getting it from, because every writer's, that line, every writer's a thief. They're taking things that they like and adapting it. I have started to read the next one, and I'm enjoying it a little more. It's very dark.
Oh, yeah.
Really quickly. Like, I'm in the first chapter, and they know they're in a fucked up timeline, and they're in the same, I'm taking it's supposed to be the same cafe from Remembrance. Or something. I get this weird feeling. I've got to go back and read it because I'm reading it on my phone. So I was reading it, and it's just they're in a shop getting something to eat, and it's that whole scene with the Nazis and everything's, they don't have real coffee. They don't have this because they're, occupied. And it's really dark very quickly. They don't play with any of it. That, it's not cartoon Nazis. It's the Nazis took over. The world is awful.
Mm-hmm.
So I dug that. And I like Terrence. I like Terrence Dick's books. Some of his are a little overwritten, but I always kind of like them. He wrote some of my favorite missing ones. But I'm looking forward to reading that one more so than because it's starting. I want it to have some effect on me because I read the EDAs, and I know they're probably not. They're a little more toned down than these.
Yeah, the EDAs started off writing from a position of safety, and then they ended up going very, very experimental and hard to process and hard to fathom. So for me, there are a few ADAs that are as good as the NAs, but there's a lot of experimental stuff later on in the EDAs that's worth experiencing, if not enjoying.
It would. Someone would ask me, it's like because that's all I read for a couple of years was those, and my brother who hasn't read any of the novels, and they asked, and I said, what were they like? Is some of them are god awful and hard to get through. Others are light pulp adventure, and you read them in like a day, and others are really kind of thought provoking and complicated and have a very epic feel. I liked the fraction paradox stuff, as confusing and weird as it was. I loved it, and I loved Fitz. Fitz is one of my favorite. He's my favorite kind of novel companion because it was nice for the Doctor to have, just an average guy traveling with him, and he was there for so long because I forgot about it. When I finished it, it was like crap. He's in almost all of these.
And they do some weird things to Fitz's timeline. He is taken prisoners by the communists, and he ages 3 years in one of the books.
Yeah, I listened.
Then he gets abducted by a faction paradox and replaced by a facsimile, and there's an issue with his memory. Very strange what happens to Fitz. But the EDAs are also the birthplace of the Time War, which directly influences the new series. Without the EDAs, you didn't get the new series treating Gallifrey the way that it does. Yeah. Gallifrey is destroyed in the books, so it's destroyed on TV. towards the end, there's a big story arc involving what were supposed to be the Daleks, but they couldn't get the rights, and that winds up being realized where the Daleks are the Time War enemy on television.
What I liked about some of it, like when you have the 100 years where the TARDIS is regrowing, the Doctor's regaining his memory, and like he has the adventure with Graham Greene and Alan Turing. I love that one.
And Joseph Heller, the American.
Yeah, that's a great book. My brother was like, "How good is it?" I don't know them as well. I feel I do know these guys, and I would look stuff up, and when I think they kind of really portray them in as historically accurate as you can. They didn't act out of character. But I did like that era where the TARDIS is regrowing and he's and Fitz and Compassion are trying to get back to him. And I kind of want to get back to the New Adventures. Is I kind of want to read through it because I want to experience Benny in the books, because I really have only experienced Benny in audible form. So, and I'm like going, when I read this, I want to be able to when we get to Benny more, that I want to read it and have my vision of Benny and not it all be Lisa Bowerman. Does that make sense? Because I don't have the luxury of having my own version of Benny in my head. Did she make Benny? Was she close to your Benny?
Benny is not my character. Benny, I got tired of in a hurry because there are books where she's very poorly written. She is self-righteous. She is judgmental. She is physically violent. She is an alcoholic. I have not listened to a lot of the Lisa Bowerman stuff, but Benny has continued as a concept for over 30 years. So if there is credit for making Benny work, 99% of that credit has to go to Lisa Bowerman.
Yeah.
I was sick of her by the end of the books, and she's not a companion anymore over the last year or so, so I was happy to see her go.
I'm intrigued by, what is it, Chris and
Roz.
I'm very intrigued by them.
Yeah, they were invented by Andy Lane for the book Original Sin. I like Andy
Lane's books.
Original Sin is a great book. It is a 30th century sci-fi epic. The later book, So Vile a Sin, is roughly a sequel to the same timeline, the same story plot, different author though. The identity of the bad guy in Original Sin was spoiled for me, and to this day, 30 years later, I am still angry about being spoiled because I would have loved to have gone into that book blind, not knowing who the villain was.
I hate when that happens, so I don't want to. I'm glad I don't know, because I hate it when someone ruined it when I was watching Buffy the first time, and when Giles's girlfriend, the teacher, dies. Someone told me 10 minutes before I watched it. Thinking, that's when she dies, and I was like, and his wife was one of my best friends. She was the one that turned me on to Buffy, and she just looked at her husband and went, "Oh, you idiot!" And he's like, "Oh fuck, you didn't know?" It's like, "No, I didn't know. We were just about to watch it."
Yeah.
So, all right. So, hey, thanks for coming on talking about this. We kind of talked more about the books as whole. When I do get around to the next Sylvester and we do the next book, I will have it read, and probably, hopefully, more, because I'd like to read them, and maybe that this year will be the year I start reading the NAs for the first time.
If you want to cover them for the podcast, you don't necessarily want to read all 61. There are books that can be safely skipped without missing any great works of literature or any important story arc points. If you want me to lead you on a curated journey through the best of the 61, I can certainly do that. If you want to read all 61, that's great too.
Yeah, I think I need to read them. I mean, I haven't. I sold all my books because, one, I just don't have the room, and I'm still trying to get rid of more stuff just so I can get down to the nitty gritty. And, there are other ways. There's, I have digital copies of most of them. So
yeah, I've got the whole line on PDF. It's not the same reading it on a Kindle. Having the actual physical books brings back a lot of memories for me. This is a case where I need the Dead Tree edition.
Well, I'm that way with some of my comics. That's why I've been buying the big collected editions of this old stuff. Is I don't have room for 1,000 comic boxes, but I can get 4 or 5 hardcovers on the shelf that have hundreds of issues.
Yeah.
All right. So hey, let's. Why don't you tell everybody about your podcasts?
So it's very funny that you and I are recording this, and I'm sitting in my dining room, but you are sitting in front of a still photo from the animated Galaxy 4.
Yeah, yeah.
And as it turns out, Doctor Who literature, the episode I am releasing tomorrow morning is The Twin Dilemma, but next week's episode is Galaxy 4. I am recording that live at Galley.
Oh, that's cool.
And I'll be releasing Galaxy 4 next week. So I have just been reading that book, so seeing that still, it's Vicky cutting Steven's hair and the Doctor working on the old green original 1960s TARDIS console.
Yeah.
And
I don't know why I picked this one. I don't remember why this is up on my screen. I haven't used Skype in a few recordings because I've been on other people's podcasts.
Galaxy 4 is an interesting book, and then also at Galley, I plan to record on Time Lash with Simon Gurrier, who I know has been on your show, so I'm looking forward to talking to him.
Oh, that's going to be awesome. Tell Sai I said hi.
And more importantly, Mark from Trap One is going to be at Galley for the first time, so we're going together. And
have you met him in person yet?
Yeah, he came to New York with his wife a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Just lovely people. Mark is a lot taller than I am, so the photo of us standing in Times Square, I appear to be standing in a ditch. Because he is 6'4", and I am about an inch and a half shorter than I was at my peak, and I am much smaller than he is. But he and I are going to also be recording a book for Doctor Who literature, but we're going to be recording our interview over dinner in the hotel restaurant, my dinner with Andre style. So
that's
very much
cool.
Looking forward to all that. Three live episodes being recorded at Galley.
That sounds like fun. One day I will get to Galley. All right, folks. So let me think what's next. Next coming up will be the next Paul McGann. Oh, so I think we're getting. I think it is time for Neverland, if I'm remembering. That should be next because we will be I'm going to continue doing the Paul McGann Big Finish in order because that's kind of like that's the way I kind of think of him when I want to do a rewatch. It's like I'll just listen to a bunch of really good Big Finish with Paul McGann. So, all right, folks. But thank you for listening, Jason. Thank you for coming on. Hey, and we look forward to seeing you all somewhere in time or